"Your brother's locked up in there," the little street urchin declared to the millionaire, standing before a bricked-up wall. Then, when they tear down the wall, they uncover something that shocks everyone. Comment: giving a rating from 0 to 10 for my story, your opinion is very important. And subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The cry echoed through the frigid streets of the sprawling metropolis like a blade slicing through the silence of the early morning. Widower and millionaire, 30-year-old Jonathan John Sterling, startled awake in his mansion on the outskirts of the city, his heart pounding as the sound replayed in his memory. He'd been living this nightmare for 6 months, ever since his younger brother Mikey had vanished without a trace, as if swallowed by the earth. His routine had transformed into a desperate search. During the day, he managed his businesses with mechanical efficiency. His investments in Wall Street stocks continued to generate substantial profits. But at night, he roamed the dark streets looking for any clue. His considerable fortune, accumulated through years of hard work and shrewd decisions in the financial market, now seemed useless in the face of the absence that consumed his soul. His stepmother, Eleanor, watched his obsession with growing irritation. An elegant, middle-aged woman, always impeccably dressed, she couldn't understand why he wasted time and resources looking for someone who had clearly chosen to leave. Her cold eyes followed John's every move, calculating how his fixation might affect the interests of her own 4-year-old son, Preston. In the 3rd week of December, during one of his nightly walks through the city's downtrodden district, he found her. A tiny figure huddled against the wall of an abandoned building, shivering under a tattered blanket. The 4-year-old girl looked barely 2, so frail and emaciated that his heart broke instantly. Her large, dark eyes shone with a sadness that shouldn't exist in someone so young. Without hesitation, he knelt beside the child. His most defining characteristics had always been excessive compassion for the needy and an inability to ignore the suffering of others, traits that Eleanor considered dangerous to the family's wealth. The girl looked up at him, and for a moment they remained in absolute silence. "Are you cold?" he asked gently, taking off his coat to wrap it around her. The girl nodded timidly, but her eyes didn't leave his face, as if she were studying every detail. There was something familiar in that gaze, an intensity that disturbed him inexplicably. "What's your name?" He tried again, but she only shook her head, indicating that she wouldn't speak. He took her home that night, ignoring Eleanor's furious protests about bringing dangerous strangers into their luxurious residence. The elderly housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, a kind woman who had worked for the family for decades, welcomed the child with maternal tenderness, providing clean clothes and warm food. During the following days, the girl remained almost completely silent, observing everything around her with those penetrating eyes. She ate little, slept even less, and always seemed alert, like a wild animal ready to flee at the slightest sign of danger. Eleanor's son, Preston, showed obvious jealousy of the attention she received, throwing constant tantrums and trying to get his father's attention. It was on the 5th morning that everything changed. The girl was playing in the garden when she suddenly stopped, fixing her gaze in the direction of downtown. Slowly, she walked to where John was having coffee, and for the first time, spoke. "He's in there," she whispered in a trembling voice, pointing beyond the trees. "Who's where?" he asked, his heart already racing. "Your brother. He's locked up." The world seemed to stop. How could a street child know about his brother? How did she know he had a brother? His hands trembled as he knelt before her. "Where? Where is he?" The girl led him through the familiar streets until they reached the deteriorated downtown area. She stopped in front of an abandoned building, its windows covered with old boards and graffiti covering the peeling walls. With her small, dirty finger, she pointed to a specific wall on the ground floor. "In there, he cries at night." The revelation struck him like lightning. Without hesitation, he called a construction crew, offering any amount of money for them to come immediately. Eleanor arrived minutes later, alerted by Mrs. Gable, her eyes flashing with barely contained fury at the sight. "You've completely lost your mind," she hissed. "You're destroying someone else's property because of the delusions of a traumatized child." But he couldn't stop. Hope had been reborn in his chest with devastating force. As the workers worked with jackhammers and breakers, breaking brick by brick, he held the girl's small hand, both watching in tense silence. When the wall finally gave way, revealing the hidden space, his heart sank. The place was empty, except for a torn rag doll lying on the dusty floor. "No," he murmured, entering the space and rummaging through every corner. "No, he had to be here." The girl began to cry, silent tears streaming down her dirty cheeks. "He was here. I saw him. I heard him cry." Eleanor approached with a triumphant expression. "Now you see what I was trying to tell you. This child is disturbed, a liar looking for attention. You're being manipulated." But when Mrs. Gable picked up the doll from the floor, her face paled completely. Her elderly hands trembled as she examined the worn toy. "Mr. Sterling," she whispered, "this doll, it belonged to your brother when you were children." The revelation about the doll changed everything. John held the worn toy with trembling hands, painful memories flooding his mind. He and Mikey had spent terrible years in the orphanage before the adoption, and that doll was the only comfort the younger boy possessed during the nights of terror and abandonment. "How is it possible?" he murmured, looking at the girl who continued to cry silently. "How did this doll get here?" Mrs. Gable approached, her decades of loyalty to the family weighing on every word. "Mr. Sterling, there's something I never told you. The night your brother disappeared, he came to me. He was agitated, talking about dangerous secrets he had discovered. He mentioned he needed to hide for a while." Eleanor interrupted sharply. "Nonsense from a senile old woman. The boy simply decided to leave. People do it all the time." But John couldn't take his eyes off the doll. His analytical mind, trained to detect patterns in the financial markets, began to connect pieces of a disturbing puzzle. The girl knew about the existence of his brother, knew this specific location, and now a concrete piece of evidence appeared linking everything. During the following weeks, the little girl continued to appear at his mansion daily. She always arrived in the morning, like a silent ghost, and remained observing everything with those immense and disturbing eyes. Eleanor's son, Preston, developed a growing hatred for the intruder, reaching the point of trying to push her down the stairs in a moment of uncontrolled rage. "She's manipulating you," Eleanor insisted during tense dinners. "Street children learn early on to exploit the kindness of others. You're putting our family at risk for a stranger." But something in the girl's silent determination deeply touched John's heart. His second defining characteristic, stubborn persistence in the face of obstacles, prevented him from giving up. He had built his financial empire precisely by never accepting easy defeats. And now he applied the same tenacity to the search for answers. The child began to lead him to other locations around the city. First, an abandoned warehouse in the industrial suburbs, where she pointed to dark basements, stating with unwavering conviction that he was down there. Then, an old church in the historic district, where she insisted she had heard muffled cries coming from the bell tower. Each fruitless search left John more desperate and confused. His businesses began to suffer from his constant absences. Important meetings were cancelled, lucrative contracts lost, and his portfolio of investments in Bitcoin and other digital assets remained without the necessary attention. His passive income continued to arrive through dividends and interest from previous investments, but his net worth began to show signs of instability. It was during the third month of this obsessive journey that the girl became seriously ill. Her severe malnutrition, aggravated by the harsh winter cold, resulted in a high fever that left her delirious for days. Mrs. Gable cared for her tirelessly, while Eleanor repeatedly suggested that she be taken to a public hospital and forgotten there. During a particularly difficult night, the fever reached its peak. The child talked to herself, murmuring disconnected words that made John's blood run cold. She described with impossible details his brother's traumatic childhood in the orphanage, mentioning specific scars on his left arm and his pathological terror of confined spaces. "The boy with the scars cries in the dark," she babbled. "He's afraid of small places. The walls close in and he screams, but nobody hears." How could a street child know such intimate details about traumas that only he and his brother shared? Mrs. Gable, present during the delirium, then revealed her own suspicion guarded for months. "Mr. Sterling, I've always believed that your brother didn't leave voluntarily. He was terrified of something he had discovered. He talked about documents, about dangerous people, but I didn't want to worry you more than you already were." Eleanor, realizing that her version of events was being questioned, made a drastic decision. She discreetly contacted a local psychologist, offering a considerable sum for him to evaluate the girl and issue a diagnosis of severe mental disorders. The resulting documents could justify forced admission to a psychiatric institution. "The child needs professional help," she argued, presenting the falsified papers. "Her fantasies are becoming increasingly elaborate and dangerous. She's destroying our family." But John, using his third defining characteristic, a keen intuition for detecting lies, developed through years of negotiating with dishonest people, sensed something sinister in Eleanor's urgency to get rid of the girl. He began to watch her more closely, noting whispered conversations on the phone and secret meetings with strangers. During the 4th month, a casual discovery completely changed his perspective. While organizing old papers in the office, he found records of employees from his company from previous years. A name caught his attention. The girl's father had worked for him before passing away in an accident, and always spoke proudly about his little daughter with an extraordinary memory. The revelation hit him like a hammer. The child wasn't just any stranger from the streets. She had a real connection to his family, and her ability to remember specific details wasn't the result of manipulation, but a genuine ability that explained her knowledge about people she should never have met personally. That night, he confronted Eleanor directly, but she maintained her version with calculated coldness. However, her eyes revealed a flash of panic that confirmed his growing suspicions. Something much more complex was happening, and the fragile child sleeping in the guest room could be the only person capable of leading him to the devastating truth that someone was desperately trying to hide. The discovery about the girl's father completely transformed John's perspective. He spent entire nights studying the old company files, reconstructing the life of the deceased employee. The man had been loyal and dedicated, always mentioning with pride the exceptional intelligence of his little daughter. Now, that child lived on the streets, orphaned and helpless, while he possessed enough resources to help thousands like her. Guilt consumed him devastatingly. His investments in stocks and funds continued to generate astronomical profits. His net worth in dollars grew automatically through well-structured investments. But what was the point of all this wealth if he couldn't protect a child who had a direct connection to his family? During the 5th month of the obsessive search, the girl led him again through the dark streets of the metropolis. This time, she seemed more confident, her steps small but determined. She stopped in front of a series of abandoned buildings in a decaying industrial area, pointing to specific windows in each structure. "He's been in all these places," she said in a firm voice, demonstrating a certainty that contrasted with her physical fragility. "They move him when it gets dark, always to where nobody looks." The revelation that his brother might be being held in different locations, constantly transferred to avoid discovery, opened up a terrifying possibility. This wasn't a voluntary disappearance, but an organized and systematic captivity. John discreetly hired a team of private investigators, using part of his fortune to finance a professional search. But each lead led to dead ends. Each location indicated by the girl revealed only traces. Marks of ropes on the walls, leftover food, signs that someone had been there recently. Eleanor intensified her psychological attacks. During a particularly violent discussion, she revealed information that made his blood run cold. She knew details about the family businesses that she should never know, mentioned specific financial transactions and confidential contracts with a precision that only someone with internal access could have. "You think you know this family?" she said with a cruel smile. "There are secrets here that your brother discovered and that cost him dearly. Secrets that could cost you dearly too, if you keep asking inconvenient questions." The veiled threat confirmed his worst suspicions. Eleanor wasn't just a passive observer of the situation. She was actively involved in his brother's disappearance. But how to prove that without concrete evidence? It was then that the girl demonstrated her extraordinary ability most clearly. During one of their nightly walks, she began to recite entire conversations she had witnessed months before, reproducing dialogues between Eleanor and unknown men with photographic precision. Her memory not only captured words, but intonations, gestures, and environmental details with absolute accuracy. "The fancy lady talked about the secret basement," the child said, her large eyes fixed on his face. "She said the boy with the scars couldn't leave ever again because he knew too much about the stolen money." John's heart skipped a beat. A secret basement. Were there spaces on his own property that he didn't know about? The mansion was old, built decades before he bought it, and he had always suspected that it might have hidden areas. That night, he began a meticulous search of the property. Mrs. Gable, initially reluctant, eventually revealed that she had always heard strange noises coming from the cellar, especially during the early hours of the morning. Sounds she attributed to the wind or the old pipes, but that now gained sinister meaning. Eleanor's son, Preston, consumed by sickly jealousy, tried to violently stop the search. During a fit of rage, the 4-year-old boy pushed the little street urchin down the stairs, causing injuries that almost resulted in hospitalization. The cold cruelty demonstrated by someone so young revealed the toxicity that permeated that family. "He learned that from someone," Mrs. Gable murmured while tending to the girl's wounds. "Children aren't born with that evil. They learn by watching." The searches of the mansion intensified during the 6th week of the 5th month. John hired experts in old buildings, architects who could identify inconsistencies in the original structure. His expenses with the investigation had already consumed a significant portion of his monthly income, but he didn't care. His entire fortune would be insignificant if he couldn't find his brother. Eleanor watched the preparations with growing, barely disguised desperation. Her attempts to sabotage the search became more obvious. Important documents disappeared mysteriously, workers were discouraged through veiled threats, and equipment suffered inexplicable accidents. It was during a stormy night that the truth began to emerge in a devastating way. The girl, awakened by the thunder, ran in panic through the hallway and stopped abruptly before a specific wall on the ground floor. She pressed her ear against the surface, and her eyes filled with tears. "He's down there," she whispered. "He's crying again. The small walls make him remember the bad place where you guys lived when you were little." John knelt beside her, also pressing his ear against the wall. Initially, only silence. But then, almost imperceptible, a sound that made his world crumble, muffled sobs coming from somewhere beneath them. His brother was there, on the family property, beneath his feet. The revelation that Eleanor had kept his brother prisoner in his own house during all those months of desperate searching was like a stab to the heart. But even worse was the realization that she had orchestrated everything with calculated coldness, turning the search into an elaborate psychological torture. When he confronted Eleanor that same night, she finally revealed the truth with a cruel smile that froze his blood. Eleanor's confession echoed through the room like a sentence of doom. Her eyes shone with a coldness that he had never noticed before, as if a carefully constructed mask built over years had finally fallen. "Your brother discovered my transactions with the company's funds," she said in a calm, almost casual voice. "He thought he could blackmail me, threatened to expose everything to protect his precious family fortune. How naive." John felt the world spin around him. For months, she had watched his growing desperation, his sleepless nights, his destructive obsession, knowing exactly where the person he was looking for was. The cruelty of that manipulation surpassed anything he could have imagined. "Where is he?" he asked in a hoarse voice, struggling to control the fury that threatened to explode. "Initially, I convinced him that it would only be temporary. A few days for me to reorganize the accounts, transfer the amounts back. He agreed to hide in the basement I had secretly built. He believed he was helping me correct an accounting error." The revelation about the secret basement explained the work she had personally supervised 2 years before, claiming to be improvements to the foundation. In fact, she was building a prison for anyone who dared to challenge her plans. But the days turned into weeks, and he started to freak out. That pathological fear of confined spaces that you both developed in the orphanage intensified. He tried to get out several times, but I convinced him that it was still dangerous, that there were people looking for him. John understood with growing horror how Eleanor had systematically exploited his brother's childhood traumas. She knew his deepest fears, his psychological vulnerabilities, and had used them as weapons to keep him subdued. "When you started looking for him, I realized the perfect opportunity. I let you despair, let you spend your fortune on useless investigations. Every day of your suffering was a guarantee that I would have more time to consolidate my control over the business." The girl, who had remained silent throughout the confession, suddenly ran towards the wall where they had heard the sobs. She began to beat her small fists against the surface, screaming with desperation. "Uncle! Uncle, I brought help. You can come out now." The voice that answered from the other side made John's heart shatter into a million fragments. It was his brother, but he sounded broken, distorted by prolonged suffering. "Who's there? Please don't hurt me anymore. I won't tell anyone anything. I promise I'll stay quiet." The state of mental deterioration was evident in every word. Months of captivity and psychological manipulation had turned the confident young man he knew into a terrified shadow of himself. Locating the secret entrance took hours. Eleanor, realizing that her charade had come to an end, attempted one last desperate move. She locked herself in the office and began destroying documents, burning evidence of her financial crimes while threatening to call the police, claiming property invasion. But Mrs. Gable, finally freed from the fear that had silenced her for so long, revealed the exact location of the entrance, a mobile section of the wall disguised behind a heavy bookcase of old books. When they finally managed to open the passage, what they found surpassed their worst nightmares. The basement was small, claustrophobic, illuminated only by a dim bulb. His brother was huddled in a corner, too thin, bearded, eyes wild with someone who had spent months living in constant terror. "It's not real," he murmured upon seeing his older brother. "She said you were dead, that I was being wanted by the police, that I could never get out of here." The reunion was devastating and at the same time liberating. John hugged his brother carefully, feeling how his body trembled uncontrollably. Years of therapy would be needed to repair the psychological trauma inflicted, but they were finally together again. The girl watched the scene with tears streaming down her dirty cheeks. It was then that Mrs. Gable made a final revelation that connected all the remaining pieces of the puzzle. "Mr. Sterling, There's something else you need to know about this child. Your brother told me the night he disappeared that he had been secretly taking care of the daughter of his former employee. He discovered that she was on the streets after the loss of her father and had been leaving food and blankets for her regularly. The emotional connection between the girl and his brother was no coincidence. For months, even in captivity, he had worried about her well-being, and this connection had allowed her to know where to find him through her extraordinary memory of the conversations she had witnessed. She was the only real witness to everything, continued Mrs. Gable. She saw when they took your brother to the basement, heard Eleanor's conversations with the men who helped her, but who would believe a traumatized street child? The emotional cost of the discovery was immense. Eleanor would face legal consequences for her crimes, but the damage was already done. John's trust in the people around him was completely destroyed, and his brother would need years to overcome the trauma of captivity. But there was hope. In the following days, he officially took custody of the girl, providing her with adequate medical care, quality education, and, more importantly, the love and security she had never known. His company underwent a complete restructuring. He implemented social programs to help children living on the streets, transforming his pain into purpose and his individual compassion into lasting social impact. A significant portion of his profits from investments began to be directed to funds that helped families in vulnerable situations. His brother, even with his psychological scars, gradually began to participate in social projects, finding in helping others a way to process his own trauma. Family therapy became part of the weekly routine, rebuilding the bonds that were almost lost forever. The girl flourished under adequate care. Her extraordinary memory, now channeled into studies and learning, revealed a brilliant intelligence that promised a future full of possibilities. She would never forget the cold streets where she grew up, but now she had the chance to transform those experiences into strength to help other children. 6 months after the rescue, while watching the girl playing in the garden with her brother in recovery, John understood that some fortunes aren't measured in dollars or financial assets. True wealth was in the family he almost lost, and in the child who brought him back home, proving that even in the most desperate situations, the persistence of true love can overcome any adversity and create a future full of hope for all involved.